The big question is, what does the Israeli military do next? Currently, they're going literally house to house in and around Gaza City, hunting for the Hamas tunnels and weapon stores and destroying them wherever they find them. But Hamas, a lot of Hamas fighters and probably some of the leaders have already fled south.
We've had evidence shown to us, haven't we, today, photographs from Israeli military that show weapons and other military equipment at the Al-Shifa hospital. Is that satisfactory evidence, do we think, that Hamas leaders were there?
Well, it's satisfactory evidence. It depends on who is the judge of that evidence. Those who are willing to listen to Israel's case will, I think, see that as a satisfactory evidence. And it wasn't really in doubt before that the Americans just a few days ago, endorsed Israel's intelligence assessment that Al-Shifa Hospital had been used in the past by Hamas for military purposes. And even Amnesty International, no big fan of Israel, wrote that in a report back in 2014 that Hamas had used Al-Shifa for carrying out torture of its opponents. So the fact that Al-Shifa was and has been a major headquarters for Hamas is barely disputed by anybody reasonable. But obviously there will be those who won't accept the evidence. It's not just Al-Shifa. Hamas has been entrenched in both its political and military wing in Gaza for 16 years now. So it's not as if one hospital or not is the proof for or against that.
Look, the situation at the hospital remains dire. I was discussing comments from a director of the hospital, just saying that water, electricity, medical oxygen supply is completely cut off. We cannot reach the pharmacy, they say, to treat patients as the occupation shoots everyone who moves. These are his comments. The smell of death wafts everywhere. Look, it really depends how you interpret those comments, how you interpret the evidence, as we've discussed, of military equipment being at the hospital. But the fact is that this situation cannot continue indefinitely, can it? When there are, casualties at the hospital, incredibly ill people at the hospital still needing treatment. Will Israel relent? I mean, at what point will the IDF start to recede from the hospital? What is the aim here of the Israeli military?
No, the Israeli military for the past month has had an aim of evacuating Gaza City so it can deal with the Hamas military infrastructure there. That includes also hospitals. And just as in Mosul 5 years ago, the Western coalition there made that as a condition also for ISIS, who were holding on to Mosul, that the hospitals which were being used by ISIS as a military base had to be evacuated. And Israel has already sent various offers to the management of Al-Shifa Hospital to evacuate patients and to other facilities and opened up a corridor for doing so. I don't think the Israeli army is planning at any point to retreat from there. It's from their perspective, it's a military facility, and there are civilians there which need to be taken out of harm's way. But it's not the Israeli military which is preventing that from happening. To that point, or as a side point, we understand that an Israeli minister, a member of the Security Cabinet, Gideon Saar, told Jewish News that Israel's ready for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza in order to return the 239 hostages held by Hamas. What do you make of that, Anshel? Well, there is negotiations which have been ongoing for a number of weeks now between Israel and through third parties, because Israel's not negotiating directly with Hamas, but mainly through Hamas's Qatari backers over a hostage, some kind of hostage release agreement. Hamas and other Palestinian groups snatched what are now believed to be 239 hostages on October 7th, and they're still incarcerated in Gaza. So there are, at the same time, talks going on about trying to release them, trying to reach some kind of agreement. Gideon Saar hasn't said anything that we hadn't known before.
And in terms of the hostages. Are there any further developments apart from obviously that line from the member of the Security Cabinet? Are there any other updates as to negotiations on those hostages?
Well, these type of negotiations are obviously being held in secret. That those who are conducting them from Israel's side are the chiefs of Mossad and other intelligence and military figures who are not giving us the constant updates about what's happening. And the same thing with Hamas. There's a lot of psychological warfare going on around this. Mainly, Hamas kind of putting out videos of Israeli hostages. One was put out a couple of days ago of a 19-year-old woman who since has been declared by the Israeli army as being dead. And there have been a number of other videos put out. And obviously Hamas is under a lot of pressure right now with Israel closing in on its headquarters in Gaza. They're trying to use the hostages that they took by now 5.5 weeks ago to try and alleviate that.
Yeah, look, we're also waiting for an outcome of a vote from the United Nations Security Council on a draft resolution proposed by Malta for urgent and extended humanitarian pauses and corridors throughout the Gaza Strip for a sufficient number of days to enable aid access. I suppose the big caveat we need to put to that is that doesn't need to be binding, and the sort of history of cooperation between the United Nations and Israel is pretty sketchy as well. Look, you've been following the conflict. You've been with IDF forces, I know, writing some fantastic journalistic pieces for the Times. What is your view on where the war goes from here? It sounds like a very open-ended question, but I'm just keen for someone who's been within Gaza, who is incredibly well briefed on this and incredibly experienced as to the history of conflict between Hamas and Israel and the plight of Palestinian people as well. What is your view at the moment, Anshel, on this conflict?
Well, we're at the point which is really unprecedented, where Israel has gone in with immense force into Gaza City and the northern sector of the Gaza Strip. And in the build-up to that, most of the population of Gaza City, over 1 million people, have fled south. So all of a sudden, the Gaza Strip, which I'm sure most of your readers know the map, it's kind of this narrow coastal enclave, is now cut into two, with almost the entire population being in the southern part, while the Israeli army is in the northern part. And this creates a whole new reality on the ground. The main urban center of Gaza is now empty, with the exception of a few thousand people in and around Al-Shifa Hospital and a few other hospitals in the center of the city. The whole place is now almost empty and under Israeli military control. So that also creates a humanitarian crisis in the southern Gaza Strip, because the Egyptians on the border are not going to allow refugees out. So the big question is what's going to happen down south now. I mean, obviously everybody's looking at Shifa Hospital right now, but that's a drama that will probably be somehow resolved in the next 2 or 3 days. And the big question is, what does the Israeli military do next? Currently, they're going literally house to house in and around Gaza City, hunting for the Hamas tunnels and weapon stores and destroying them wherever they find them. But Hamas, a lot of Hamas fighters and probably some of the leaders have already fled south. So what does Israel do? Does Israel pursue them there? They're now in this area, which is totally crowded with refugees. The international community probably won't be that happy if that happens. Israel's got backing from Britain and from the United States up until now for its campaign, but I don't think that'll extend to another stage in the south. So the real question is, what happens in the next stage? What does Israel pursue Hamas there in a different way, with less firepower, perhaps more mobile forces? Does Israel perhaps wait and see if the local population, which we're hearing are very angry at Hamas now because they're blaming them for bringing this calamity down on Gaza and its people, will there be some kind of a change there? Obviously, Hamas is not exactly a democratic movement, so they're not going to be brooking any kind of open opposition. But things could happen there in the next few days and weeks that are hard at this point to predict.
Yeah. So interesting to hear from you, Anshel. Thank you so much, in Israel for the Times. And you can read his reporting in the Times. Such incredible insight from someone so experienced across this. Anshel Pfeffer, thank you for being with us. Hugely appreciated. Thank you.